Now, does anybody know what car that is? Don't be clever and tell me it's a Toyota, because it is. But do you know what it is? This is now exceptionally rare. There's only 3 of these cars remaining in the world, and this is the only one that is a tarmac trim car. It's owned by Ernt Kopp, ex-TTE transmission engineer, and he bought this with the closure of the Formula 1 at TTE back in 2010. This was going to be their Group S Challenger, which was going to come and follow on straight off the back of Group B. It was tested in total privacy back at the time, but then with the death of Henry Toivonen and the whole Group B beginning to implode, Group S was then scrapped. So the majority of the spares and everything else that was back in Japan, cars, spares, everything was completely destroyed. But Ernst has brought it here. He is actually going to be driving it, which is amazing. He told me he has 0 spares for it. So it really is a case of look after it and make sure it's 100% reliable, because if he's going to take a corner off, that's the end of the car almost. So it's quite rare. But we've got an opportunity to have a look around it. So very strange looking thing in this satin matte black finish. But although it's a Toyota MR-2, basically the only thing that's existing is the main passenger cell, but then everything else was chopped off with space frames at the front and space frames at the rear, and all these other panels are all carbon Kevlar, obviously as a weight saving. It was a mid-engined car. At the end of the day, was going to give the best balance, and it's a 4-wheel drive system, but the Japanese were quite clever and designed it so you could adjust and choose what torque split you want, front to rear. Automation back in those days is not done by computers necessarily. It was all done at the press of buttons from the inside. Okay, let's have a look under the bonnet. I would say the feel of that bonnet is probably lighter than the aluminium stay to hold it up. It's really lightweight. As you can see, if you come in a little closer, you've got a very big radiator in the front with ducting to help get the air straight out from the radiator to improve the cooling. Spare wheels sitting in the front against the front subframe system, and everything is virtually open to the elements here. You can see the front diff and drive shafts going off at the suspension, but it really was built nothing more than for speed. Group S was just about giving more power, having a lighter car. It was going to be no more than 1,000 kilos in weight, but it would have up to 600 horsepower. So it would make it an incredibly fast car. Safety was not such a big concern, just doing the basics, but very interesting nonetheless. Let's go and have a look in the back of the car. So from the rear, you can see that it is very much an MR2. This is an MR2 rear end, but again, this is something completely separate to the main body shell, and this is all one big unit. As you can see, space framed, mid-engine with the engine immediately behind the crew in the cab with just a perspex screen. Transmission tacked right on the back. Massive intercooler here with a great big air, well, it's an air-cooled intercooler, but really, really big. But when we look down here, it gets really quite interesting. The Japanese had it in their mind to have a transmission system that would allow them to alter the bias of the transmission to full front, rear, 70, 30, 60, 40. But all this was done via a vacuum system here with all the valves which are controlled with the red buttons that are in front of the gear stick. The driver has the option just to choose what split he wanted. And that's what all this system is then changing the bias of the transmission. Interesting. I mean, that was something that hadn't been done before, but of course, it never really had a chance to prove itself, other than very private testing, which was done by TTE, believe it or not, on gravel on a farm in Argyllshire up in Scotland, and also the tarmac car was tested at the same in Scotland but on an airfield. But everything was top secret, and nobody knew that this car even sort of existed, let alone was being run. There's two exhaust systems on here. There's one which is the main exhaust for the engine, and there's a pipe which comes straight off the massive turbo that's on this car, and this is for the wastegate. So this will give you a massive chatter as it gets rid of all those gases and turbo boost that's built up in the turbo. And the other thing which was quite interesting, in the front of the car, the adjustable boost pressure, which in hindsight is fine, but giving that to a driver to control probably would have ended up in a lot of blown up engines. I'm sure they'll always want more and more power, but as it was, it never saw the light of day. Let's just go and have a look on the inside. But before we get there, one bit of interest, if you could just zoom into this. This is the original shipment sticker from Japan to Cologne, and on the 11th of February in 1986 this car arrived at TT in Cologne. So it's going back a little bit. As you could imagine, doors which weigh nothing, just perspex windows and a sliding operation. There's a couple of nice details in here, all made by the Japanese. This lovely door panel, look, with lovely little pockets to drop your headsets in and any other tools. I quite like that little modification, but plenty of storage anyway. So when you look at it from outside, let me jump in. It's very tight, all aluminium roll cage, which seems absolutely crazy nowadays. It's got more gauges and dials that you'd ever be able to read at speed, and funny enough, in this seating position, these middle ones you can't read at all. It's very much has got the feeling of Toyota, with a lot of Toyota parts, standard parts used. It's the same as in my 185. Gear shift, nicely positioned. Very short little handbrake there. But the one thing are these little red buttons here. These red buttons are the buttons that control the split of the transmission. So a driver could choose which one he wanted and go from there. But I'm sure now in its current position, you know, it's just fixed at one thing and one thing alone. The one thing that is interesting, over on the right hand side here, wastegate valve control with a boost gauge, and there's a knob here where you can twist and turn to get extra boost pressure. Really quite different. Another thing that's quite odd that I've noticed, a cigarette lighter? Why on earth would you want a cigarette lighter in a rally car? Obviously, whoever the test driver was, that was something that was really important to him. The seating position is a little strange. It's kind of tilting away from you a little bit, with the pedals slightly offset, and the tunnel is very, very small. The where your feet sit, you know, you're rubbing up against this gearbox tunnel, but there is some big padding there to help protect the driver's leg. I'm thankful to have had the opportunity just to see this car and see what Group S was, but it really is something very, very different. And with its aluminium roll cage, I'm glad for the crews anyway that didn't see the light of day. It's definitely Group B. I think in many ways through my career, would I have wanted to have sat in one of these cars? Probably back in the day I would have. But knowing what I know now, definitely not.